It was the night of our 25th wedding anniversary. The room shimmered with silver balloons and soft laughter. Friends clinked glasses, music floated through the air, and for a few brief moments I believed I was standing in the middle of a perfect life. Mark looked handsome that night, confident, smiling, the same man I'd loved for half of mine. I thought I knew what he would say when he took the microphone. Maybe a few kind words, a toast to our years together, a gentle thank you for being his partner through everything. But the words that left his mouth shattered everything I thought I knew. 25 years is long enough, he said. I think it's time I started living again, with someone who makes life exciting. The sound in the room disappeared. I could only hear my heartbeat, fast and uneven. 100 eyes turned toward me, waiting to see what I would do. For a moment, I thought I might crumble, but I didn't. I took a slow breath, stood up, and met his eyes. "If you're done talking, dear," I said quietly, "may I speak now?" That was all it took. The laughter died, the whispers stopped, and he froze. The same man who'd just tried to humiliate me in front of everyone. He thought he had ended the story that night, but he didn't know. It was the beginning of mine. A week before that night, the air in our home changed. Not in a dramatic way. No slammed doors, no obvious fights. Just a thin layer of something I couldn't name. Like dust you only notice when the light hits it at a certain angle. Mark started guarding small things. His phone, for one. He used to leave it face down on the kitchen counter, screen lighting up with sports scores and work emails. Now it lived in his pocket, even when he showered. He set a new passcode and turned off message previews. "Security update," he said, too casually when I asked. I smiled and nodded, pretending to believe him. It's strange how quickly you can become a guest in your own marriage. He came home later than usual. Not late enough to spark an argument, just late enough to make me wonder who was worth lingering for. He hummed under his breath while he hung up his jacket, a tune I didn't recognize. He'd kiss my cheek and say, "Busy day?" like he was warning me not to ask for more. And I didn't. I watched, I listened, I filed away the small things. On Tuesday, I woke up to a whisper. The house was dark, the kind of silence that holds its breath. I followed the thread of sound down the hallway and stopped outside the study. The door wasn't completely shut, just enough to force a choice. Push it open and break the illusion, or stand there and let the truth slip through the crack. I stood there, Mark's voice low. "She won't suspect a thing." My hand found the doorframe. The wood felt cool under my palm. A pause, then another voice, his mother, Judith. I didn't hear every word, just the softness of her tone, the kind of softness that always made me feel like a problem she was too polite to name. "It has to be clean," Mark said. "No scenes. It needs to look reasonable." Reasonable. I felt something inside me go very still. A reasonable betrayal. How thoughtful. I didn't push the door. I went back to bed and lay on my side, sheets cool against my knees, staring at the dresser until the edges of it blurred. There is a moment right before a storm when the air thickens and the birds go quiet. That was me. I was all quiet. He slipped into bed a few minutes later. His body was warm against my back, but he smelled like someone else's cologne. Sharper, brighter than his. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the last time I'd felt safe. I couldn't put a date to it, just a season maybe, before. Morning brought roses, pink ones with edges like folded silk. drops of water sitting on them like tiny glass beads. "For my rock," he said, placing them on the counter. He kissed my temple. He rarely called me that. I think it was supposed to erase the night before. "Long day?" I asked, careful, steady. He smiled too quickly. "Productive, you know how it is." I did. I also knew when a smile had a door behind it. He ate toast, checked his watch, straightened his cuffs. A calendar reminder flashed on. His phone before he could stop it. I saw 2 letters, call at 11. He tapped it away like swatting a fly. "Vendor?" I asked, rinsing a mug I didn't need to rinse. Yes." He poured coffee. He didn't drink. I wanted to tell him I heard the whispering. I wanted to tell him I was not a child who could be walked past a cliff with a hand over her eyes. But I swallowed my questions and waited for his car to leave the driveway. When the door closed, the house exhaled. I stood in the kitchen, the roses bright enough to hurt. 25 years is long enough, he would say later. But even then, a week before, I could feel him practicing that sentence somewhere in his mouth. I cleaned the counter. I straightened the fruit bowl. It's funny what you do when you don't want to think. You make the world neat. The sink gleamed. The silence returned. I took a slow breath and did the one thing I still controlled. I made a list. Not a list of accusations. A list of facts. Facts don't tremble. New passcode. Late nights. Unknown cologne. Whispered call with Judith. Call at 11. I put the paper in the drawer where we kept batteries and tape, the drawer that always stuck when it was humid. It felt right, truth stored where it might be hard to reach, but real all the same. That afternoon, Judith called. She always started the same way, with a sweetness that sounded like a held-back lecture. "Darling," she said, stretching the word like taffy, "have you thought about plans for the anniversary? A big year, 25. "We have," I said. "Mark wants something special." "Oh, how lovely," she purred. "And paperwork? You're both at the age where, well, one must be practical. You should really make sure the condo papers are in order, for peace of mind." She meant Mark's mind. I looked at the roses while she spoke. One petal had begun to curl in on itself like a secret. "We'll be fine," I said. "Everything's where it should be." She laughed softly, a sound that always reminded me of a spoon against porcelain. "Of course, dear, of course." When we hung up, I sat with the phone in my lap and let the quiet press against me. I thought about the first year we lived in this condo, the nail holes we patched when we moved the sofa, the way we ate dinner on the floor for a week because we couldn't decide on a table. We built a life here. We framed it, painted it, dusted it on Sundays. How quickly a life can be measured by paperwork. That night, he came home humming again. He kissed my cheek, carried in a small cake like a man doing a magic trick, and asked if I wanted to go out that weekend, the nicest restaurant, he promised. I watched him as if I were watching a play and trying to guess the ending. He was careful with his words, careful with his hands. Care is different when it's strategy. In bed, he fell asleep fast. I lay awake, counting the spaces between the breaths he took. I used to count those breaths when he worked night shifts early in our marriage, just to know he was there, safe, real. Now I counted them for time. How much time I had to move from suspicion to certainty without losing myself. Around 2 a.m, the house settled with a small groan. I turned my face into the pillow and asked the ceiling a question I had never asked in 25 years. If love is honest, why am I hiding in it? The next day, the sun came in thin and pale, the kind of winter light that doesn't promise warmth. I made coffee. I cut a slice of the cake he brought. It tasted like sugar and nothing. When he left for work, I watched his taillights disappear at the end of the street. I stood there longer than I needed to, and then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I chose myself. Not loudly, not dramatically, just in a quiet, steady way that felt like waking up slowly from a heavy sleep. I didn't plan revenge. I didn't plan speeches. I planned clarity. I opened my laptop. I wrote another list, this one of what I would need if my worst fear was true. Copies of documents, account statements, a friend I could trust with my questions. I tucked my wedding photo back into the drawer with the batteries and tape. I pressed the drawer shut and listened to it click. He would bring me roses again before the week ended. He would call me his rock, and he would smile. I would set the vase in the same place on the counter, and I would keep breathing, one calm breath at a time, until the truth stepped fully into the light. Because by then I knew something was coming. And when it arrived, I wanted to meet it standing. Judith never called before she came over. She preferred surprise visits, said they kept relationships honest. That morning, I heard her heels before I saw her, the sharp click of control echoing down my hallway. When I opened the door, she was standing there with her perfect smile and a tin of cookies, like a peace offering nobody had asked for. Her hair, silver and immovable, framed her face the way armor frames a soldier. "Darling," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. 25 years, can you believe it? I smiled politely, the kind of smile that doesn't touch your eyes. I suppose time flies. Judith handed me the tin. Homemade. Don't let them dry out like last time. There it was, her signature brand of kindness, always with a sting at the tail. We sat in the living room, the morning light falling across the rug. She crossed her legs and surveyed the room like a real estate agent. The curtains, the photos, the furniture. I could almost hear her thoughts measuring everything. She took a slow sip of her tea. "You've kept the place neat, so cozy. Of course, it's smaller than Mark's colleagues' homes, but still comfortable." I kept my hands folded in my lap. "It suits us just fine." Judith nodded, pretending agreement. Comfort matters at this age. Mark is turning 53. Can you believe that? He still has so much energy, but you never know when life will take a turn. That's why I always tell him, "Son, make sure everything is in order." She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice as though sharing sacred advice. "You should really sort out your property papers, my dear, just in case." The way she said it, soft, sweet, rehearsed, made the words feel like sugar-coated glass. I stared at her for a second, unsure how to respond. "Everything's fine," I said finally. "All our papers are where they should be." "Oh, good." Her smile widened. "Just for my peace of mind. Where exactly do you keep them? You know, in case something happens. It's so important to have a family member who knows these things." My stomach tightened. The questions sounded innocent, but her eyes were too alert, too deliberate. "In the safe," I said evenly. "Why?" "Oh, no reason," she said quickly, waving her manicured hand. "I'm just thinking about the future, you know, for Mark, and for any possible grandkids one day." I almost laughed at that. Grandkids. She knew as well as I did that we'd tried for years, that it never happened, that she'd once called me barren. during an argument she later swore she didn't remember. "Yes," I murmured. "One day." She smiled again, that same polished mask that had followed me through 2.5 decades of family dinners, birthdays, and holidays where every compliment carried a bruise. Then she stood, brushing invisible lint from her skirt. "I'm so glad. You're taking care of things. Mark deserves peace of mind, and you've always been so reliable." Reliable. The word landed like an insult pretending to be gratitude. I followed her to the door, watching her adjust her gloves with delicate precision. "You'll both look so lovely at the anniversary," she added. "Just remember, appearances matter. People should see what a strong couple you are." And with that, she left. The silence that followed her departure was almost heavy. I walked back to the living room, the smell of her perfume lingering like a ghost. The teacup she'd used was still half full, the surface cold and still. I sat down, hands clasped together, staring at the faint lipstick stain on the rim. My mind replayed her words, the way she said peace of mind, the way she asked about the safe. It wasn't curiosity, it was choreography. Mark's late nights, his sudden affection, her uninvited visit. It was all starting to connect. The picture forming in my head was ugly but clear. "They're planning something," I whispered. The sound of my own voice startled me. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. My reflection in the window looked calm, maybe even peaceful. But my heartbeat was a drum inside my chest. For 25 years, I had tried to be patient, polite, understanding. I had forgiven things I shouldn't have. I had built my whole world around love and trust. But in that moment, sitting there with Judith's untouched tea, cooling between us, something inside me shifted. I realized that the woman she thought was naive, the one who'd sit quietly while they plotted, no longer existed. I picked up the cookies she brought, opened the tin, and took one bite. Too sweet, artificial, just like her. I tossed the rest into the trash. Then I took out my phone and made a call I hadn't made in years. "Clara, it's me. I need to see you soon. It's important." She didn't ask why. She just said, "Tomorrow 6 p.m. After I hung up, I went to the window and watched the street below. The day was ordinary, dogs barking, kids playing, sunlight washing over the sidewalk. But I knew something had begun. Not an ending, not yet. A preparation, the kind that starts in silence. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay beside Mark, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. His breathing was even, peaceful, the kind of peace you can only have when you believe no one suspects you. I envied that calm for a second, then turned away. My mind wouldn't stop replaying Judith's words, her smile, her questions about the condo. At some point, I slipped out of bed. The air in the house felt still, heavy, as if it were holding its breath with me. The study door creaked softly when I opened it. His laptop sat on the desk, the screen dark but humming quietly. He'd always been predictable with his passwords. Our anniversary date, Ofyoko 9227. For 25 years, that number had opened everything. Our bank account, our Wi-Fi, our shared Netflix. But this time, the message blinked back at me. Incorrect password. I tried again, slower. Same result. My chest tightened. Changing a password isn't a crime, but in a marriage built on routine, it's a declaration. I stared at the keyboard for a while before typing it backwards, 722290. The screen flickered, then unlocked. The glow of the monitor filled the room, pale and accusing. My heart started to race, every beat loud enough to hear in my ears. The browser was still open. His search history stared at me like an open wound. How to divide property in divorce. How to keep condo after separation. Spousal waiver form sample. My stomach dropped. I scrolled, hoping to find something, anything, that would make it all a misunderstanding. Maybe research for a client, maybe advice for someone else. But there was no doubt. Every search was about how to get rid of me neatly, legally, efficiently. Then, at the bottom of the page, I saw an email notification. The subject line, Dinner with V. I opened the mail app before I could second-guess myself. Her name was Vanessa. The first message was short. Vanessa. Just one more week. I can't wait till she's out. The reply came from Mark. Mark. Patience, love. It'll all be over soon. She has no clue. My hands went cold. The kind of cold that starts in your fingers and crawls up your arms. I scrolled further. There were pictures, dinner receipts, hotel confirmations, small notes. Miss you already. Next time we'll stay longer. I stared at those words until they blurred. For 25 years, I'd believed we were partners. Now, looking at that glowing screen, I realized I'd been the quiet half of a performance. I wanted to wake him up right then, to demand an explanation, to shout, cry, anything. But something deeper stopped me. Instinct, maybe, or pride. Because if I confronted him, he'd twist it. He'd make me the hysterical wife, the one who overreacts, the one who makes things worse. He'd use my pain as proof that I was difficult. So I didn't. I took out my phone and started taking photos, the searches, the messages, even the date and time. Each click of the camera was a small act of survival, evidence over emotion. Then I closed the laptop carefully and stood there for a long time, the silence pressing around me. 25 years, 2.5 decades of shared mornings, coffee mugs, and inside jokes. And to him, I was nothing more than an obstacle between himself and something exciting. I looked around the study, the books we'd chosen together, the framed photo from our first trip to Italy, the little wooden box that held our wedding invitation. So many pieces of our story were still here, but none of them felt real anymore. I sat down in his chair, the leather cold against my legs. My reflection shimmered faintly on the laptop screen, ghost-like, distant. I didn't look angry. I looked tired. There's a strange kind of calm that comes with betrayal. It's like when glass shatters. You don't panic, you just stare, because it's already done. You can't unbreak it. I closed my eyes and let the silence stretch. Then quietly, I whispered to myself, "You're not the victim, Elena. You're the witness, and witnesses remember everything." From that moment, I decided something. I wouldn't give him the reaction he wanted. I wouldn't cry in front of him, or beg for truth from a man who'd already traded it away. Sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon. That night, I crawled back into bed beside him. He shifted slightly, mumbling in his sleep, turning toward me as if nothing had changed. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, my body beside his, my mind miles away. The next morning, I poured his coffee, just like always. He kissed my cheek, thanked me, and left for work, humming again. As soon as his car disappeared down the street, I opened my drawer and pulled out the small notebook I'd been keeping since Judith's visit. Under the last line, "They're planning something," I added one more. And now, so am I. By morning, my decision had hardened into something cold and steady. Love used to be my anchor, now logic would be. The first thing I did after Mark left for work was scroll through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in years, Clara Hayes. Clara and I met in college. Back then, she was sharp, fearless, the kind of woman who didn't raise her voice, but somehow always won the argument. Now she was one of the city's top family lawyers. When she answered, her voice was warm but cautious. "Elena Hart, my God, it's been ages." "It has," I said quietly, "and I wouldn't call if it wasn't important." She didn't ask for details. When and where? "After work, somewhere private." Done. That evening, I sat across from her in a quiet cafe near downtown. The smell of coffee and rain mixed in the air, clean, familiar, grounding. I told her everything, from Judith's strange visit to the laptop, the searches, the messages. I even showed her the photos I'd taken. When I finished, Clara leaned back, exhaling slowly. "He's building a case against you," she said. "He's gathering a story that makes you the problem. Emotionally unstable, maybe careless with finances. It's what men like him do when they want to come out clean." I looked down at my hands. "He's not just leaving, Clara. He's planning to humiliate me." She nodded. "Yes, people like him need an audience. They want power, not peace. You can't stop him from trying, but you can control what happens next." Her eyes softened. "They're going to try to trap you emotionally, make you react, make you look weak. Don't give them that. Stay calm, stay smart, and document everything." I felt something shift inside me, a quiet resolve replacing fear. "So what do I do first?" She took out a notebook, writing as she spoke. "Start collecting evidence, screenshots, call logs, emails, financial withdrawals. Move part of your money into an account with only your name. Don't move everything yet, just enough to protect yourself. And above all, pretend you don't know anything." "Pretend," I repeated softly, "like I'm still the same wife he thinks I am." "Exactly." When I left the cafe, the city lights blurred against the wet pavement. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't walking blindly. I had direction. Over the next few days, I followed Clara's advice with quiet precision. Each morning, I checked our joint bank account before Mark woke up, printing transaction records and saving them to a hidden flash drive. He'd withdrawn thousands recently: hotel stays, jewelry purchases, restaurant bills. I photographed them all. I bought a small voice recorder and left it near the phone when I knew he'd call his mother. Most of what I caught were snippets, but even a few words were enough. Anniversary, lawyer, agreement, after the party. Every night, I'd sit in bed reading while Mark drifted to sleep beside me. I'd turn pages calmly, but in my mind, I was building my defense piece by piece, like armor no one could see. Then, out of nowhere, life decided to hand me something extraordinary. It was a Thursday morning when the letter arrived, a thick, cream-colored envelope with a German return address. My Aunt Margaret, my mother's older sister, had passed away months ago. We'd exchanged Christmas cards but weren't close. I assumed it was a formal notice, maybe some family paperwork. But when I unfolded the letter, my breath caught. It was from a law firm in Munich. My aunt had named me her sole heir. 2 apartments in Germany, a vacation property in Spain, and a bank account totaling more than $1 million in euros. For a few moments, I just sat there staring at the words. The kitchen was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. My tea had gone cold. A laugh escaped me, soft, disbelieving. "Of all times," I whispered. The timing felt almost cosmic. While Mark was planning to strip me of my security, Fate had quietly given it back tenfold. I reread the letter twice, making sure I hadn't misunderstood. The assets were fully in my name, with no shared connection to Mark. The lawyers even enclosed contact details for transferring ownership and funds once I confirmed receipt. My hands trembled, but not from fear this time, from relief. For years, I had relied on the life we built together. Now, for the first time, I held proof that I didn't need it. That evening, as Mark poured wine at dinner, I caught myself smiling. A small, secret smile he mistook for affection. "What's got you so happy?" he asked, smirking. "Just thinking about how unpredictable life can be," I said. He chuckled. "You and your philosophy." If only he knew. After he went to bed, I opened my laptop and began the next step of my plan. I contacted the Munich law firm, confirmed my inheritance, and requested private transfer documents. I also called my bank the next morning and opened a new account, one only I could access. Over the following days, I kept collecting. Every piece of evidence went into a folder marked personal, locked inside my desk drawer. Clara reviewed everything and said quietly, "You're covered. No matter what he does, he can't touch you." Her words sank deep. That night, I stood by the window, watching the city lights reflect on the glass. Mark's voice drifted from the other room, laughing softly into the phone. I didn't need to listen anymore. I already knew who it was. But this time, the sound didn't hurt. It only confirmed what I already knew. I was no longer afraid. I whispered to myself, "He thinks I'm powerless. He's about to learn otherwise." And for the first time in months, I went to bed and slept through the night. The change came almost overnight. After weeks of distance, Mark turned into the husband every woman dreams of. Flowers on random mornings, surprise dinners, small boxes tied with ribbons. Each gesture perfectly timed, perfectly hollow. He brought me a silk scarf one day, saying it reminded him of our honeymoon in Paris. The next, a necklace I didn't need. He'd leave notes on the counter. "You're my everything." My forever, apparently, had an expiration date. At first, I almost laughed. The guilt was showing itself in the only way he knew how, through grand gestures. But it didn't take long to see that guilt wasn't the reason. These weren't apologies. They were distractions, stage props he was rehearsing. One evening over dinner, he said it as casually as if he were mentioning the weather. "I've planned something special for our anniversary." "Oh?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "A real celebration. 25 years, Elena. It deserves a grand moment." He looked up from his plate. A ballroom, the Watergate, 100 guests, my colleagues, friends, family, moms helping with the invitations. I forced a small smile. "That sounds extravagant." He grinned. "It's time to show everyone how far we've come." How far we've come. Those words stung. Because by then I knew the truth. This wasn't a celebration. It was a stage, and I was the unwilling centerpiece. Everything about it screamed performance. The fancy location, the public setting, the presence of witnesses. Judith would be there, watching with that perfect, polished smile. Vanessa would probably be lurking too, pretending to be an assistant, waiting for her grand entrance. And I was supposed to be the fool in the scene, blindsided, humiliated, broken. But if Mark wanted an audience, I'd make sure they saw the whole show, just not the ending he rehearsed. So I played my part. I smiled when he mentioned the catering. I nodded when he bragged about the guest list. I even pretended to care about the decor. Inside, I was memorizing every detail, times, names, receipts, the exact order of his plans. Clara's words echoed in my head. They'll try to trap you emotionally. Don't give them that. I wouldn't. The night before the event, Mark said he had last-minute errands. He left in a rush, humming like a man who believed the world was his. As soon as the door closed, I took out the folder from my desk. Inside it were the things that could destroy his illusion in seconds. The property deed, showing the condo was in my name only. The bank documents proving my new private account. The inheritance letters, stamped and signed. Screenshots of his messages, printed and neatly labeled. I slid them into my purse, my silent armor. Later that afternoon, I went to the venue. The lobby smelled like polished marble and expensive perfume. I told the front desk I was checking the space for the Heart Price anniversary. The manager led me upstairs with a practiced smile. The ballroom was massive, chandeliers sparkling, white linens already on the tables, silver roses arranged perfectly in vases. It was beautiful in a cold and impersonal way. As I walked the room, I heard laughter behind me. A woman's voice, light and careless. I turned. She stood near the entrance, tall, blonde, maybe 30, holding her phone like it was an accessory. Her coat was designer, her smile rehearsed. "The place is perfect, Dee," she said into the phone, twirling a lock of hair. "Everyone will know tomorrow." For a moment, I just watched her. Vanessa. She was exactly as I'd imagined. Polished, hungry, and young enough for Mark to feel reborn. I walked past her slowly. She looked up briefly, her eyes brushing over me without a hint of recognition. To her, I was nobody, just another guest, a stranger. And maybe that was for the best. When she turned back to her call, I caught one last sentence. "He said she still doesn't suspect a thing. Can you believe that?" I almost smiled. I didn't say a word as I left the ballroom, the click of my heels echoing off the marble floor. On the drive home, I replayed every sound, every detail. My hands were steady on the wheel. I'd stopped shaking days ago. The shock had burned out, leaving only clarity. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face looked calm, almost peaceful. For the first time, I saw the woman I used to be, before the doubts, before the betrayal. When I got home, I laid out everything on the dining table, the folder, the letters, the photos, the proof of my quiet strength. Then I chose what to take with me and slipped each piece into my purse with care. By the time Mark returned, smiling like a man on the edge of triumph, everything was ready. He kissed my cheek, told me he couldn't wait for tomorrow, and disappeared into the shower. I stood by the window, listening to the sound of the water running. Somewhere between the hiss of the faucet and the hum of the city outside, I realized something. I wasn't nervous anymore. Whatever tomorrow brought, I would walk through it, standing tall. He wanted a stage. He wanted an audience. He wanted to feel powerful. I zipped my purse, placed it by the door, and whispered to myself, "Then I'll give him a performance he'll never forget." The ballroom shimmered like a dream I no longer believed in. Silver drapes framed the walls, chandeliers sparkled above, and soft jazz played from a corner. Waiters moved between tables carrying glasses of champagne. I watched them quietly, every step rehearsed, every smile polite, all of it perfectly arranged for a show. Mark had outdone himself. He stood near the entrance, greeting guests as if he were a politician. His hand rested on shoulders, his laughter just loud enough to fill the room. Judith, his mother, hovered beside him like a proud queen, beaming as though the night belonged to her, too. I arrived a little late on purpose. Let them wonder where I was. When I finally entered, the whispers softened and people turned. Mark smiled, that same smile that once made me fall in love. I could almost hear his thoughts. She looks beautiful, perfect for the finale. I returned the smile, though mine came from a different place. Not love, not even anger. Just quiet understanding. The kind you have when you know how the story ends before anyone else does. I found my seat near the front. The tablecloths were white satin, the napkins folded like swans. Beside each plate sat a small silver box with our initials engraved, M&E, 25 years. Judith leaned toward me, her pearls gleaming under the light. "You look lovely, dear," she said sweetly. "Mark will be so proud to have you by his side tonight." "Thank you," I replied. "I'm sure he will." The evening unfolded slowly, painfully polished. Toasts, laughter, a slideshow of old photos. Our wedding day, our first home, vacations, smiles that now felt like borrowed memories. I watched the screen without blinking, like someone studying a stranger's life. Then came the moment. The host tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "Mark Price would like to say a few words for his beautiful wife." Applause filled the room. Mark stood, his posture confident, his smile warm. He lifted his glass, the light catching the rim like a blade. "Thank you," he began, his voice smooth. 25 years is a long time. Not everyone gets this far, and for that, I'm grateful. The room quieted. He looked at me briefly, then away, as if even eye contact was part of his script. "Sometimes," he continued, "love changes. It doesn't mean it was wrong. It just means life moves forward. People grow, priorities shift, and sometimes what once felt right no longer fits who we are." Every word was rehearsed, cold, cruel, perfectly practiced. Judith smiled proudly, nodding at his wisdom. I could see Vanessa in the back corner, her blonde hair catching the light, her hands clasped in nervous excitement. Mark took a deep breath, as though delivering a great truth. "It's nobody's fault," he said, his tone almost gentle. "It's just life, and tonight I want to be honest with everyone, especially with you, Elena." He looked at me then, his eyes steady, self-assured. "I want a divorce." The air vanished, the clinking of glasses stopped. A ripple of gasps swept through the room. Someone dropped a fork. Judith pressed her lips together, pretending to look pained but clearly satisfied. I felt my heart beat once, twice. Then everything went still. Mark continued, his words slicing through the silence. "I think it's best we both move on, peacefully, respectfully. We've shared good years, but it's time to embrace change." He turned to the crowd with a measured smile. "I hope you'll all understand. Life is too short to live in the past." I could feel every gaze on me, pity, shock, curiosity. I stood up slowly, my chair sliding back against the polished floor. For a brief second, I could see confusion flash across his face. This wasn't part of his script. I smoothed my dress and spoke clearly. "You're right, Mark, let's be honest." The room hushed again. "I have something to share too." I reached for my purse and drew out the folder. The soft click of the clasp sounded louder than it should have. Judith stiffened in her chair. Vanessa froze mid-smile. Mark laughed lightly, trying to regain control. "Elena, please, this isn't—" But I'd already opened the folder. Inside were the pieces of truth he thought I'd never find. "Since we're being honest," I said, You should all know the full story. My husband, Mark Price, has been planning this evening for weeks, not as a celebration, but as a performance. He wanted to humiliate me publicly, to make me sign away my home, our assets, my dignity. Whispers broke out around the tables. Mark's jaw tightened. I held up one document. Here's the deed to our condo, the same one my parents gifted me before we were married. It's in my name alone, so no, Mark, you won't be asking me to leave your home tonight, because it was never yours. Judith's face turned pale. Vanessa's lips parted in disbelief. I took out another paper, my hand steady. And since you enjoy surprises, here's one more. Last month, I received news from Germany. My late aunt left me 2 properties and over $1 million in assets. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Even the band in the corner stopped playing. So you see, Mark, I said softly, you don't have to worry about my future. I'll be just fine. Mark's mouth opened, but no words came. His eyes darted toward his mother, then toward Vanessa, searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. And one more thing, I added. For weeks, you've used our shared money, my money, to fund this little spectacle. The venue, the catering, even the flowers. $45,000 to be exact. So thank you for spending it all to host the evening where you destroyed your own reputation. A wave of murmurs rose. Someone at the back laughed quietly. Judith tried to stand, then sank back down. I looked at him one last time. You wanted freedom, Mark. Now you can have it. Just not my home, not my money, and not my dignity. The room erupted. Some people clapped, others gasped, a few simply stared. Mark stood frozen, color draining from his face. Vanessa tried to slip out, but several guests noticed and whispered. Phones came out. Screens glowed as people started recording. I closed the folder, slid it back into my purse, and smiled politely. Enjoy the evening, everyone. I think the food's lovely. Then I turned and walked toward the exit. Behind me, the ballroom broke into chaos. Voices rose, confusion, disbelief, outrage. Someone called Mark's name. Someone else called him a coward. Judith's voice cracked as she tried to explain. She misunderstood. This isn't what we planned. But I didn't look back. Each step toward the door felt lighter, freer. My heels clicked against the marble floor like punctuation marks at the end of a long, painful sentence. As I reached the entrance, I heard applause, faint at first, then growing. A few women stood, clapping slowly, knowingly. Others followed. I turned just enough to see Mark standing by the microphone, pale and speechless, surrounded by people whispering in disbelief. For years, he'd called me quiet, predictable, soft, and maybe I had been. But that night, as the doors closed behind me, I realized that silence doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it's just preparation. Outside, the night air was cool and still. The lights of the hotel shimmered on the river below. I stood there for a moment, breathing it in. The noise from the ballroom faded to a dull hum, the sound of a life unraveling without me. Then I smiled, not out of triumph, but peace. He had wanted an ending. I had written one. It didn't take long for the world to see what really happened that night. Someone had filmed the entire thing, the speech, the silence, my words, the shock, the applause. Within a few days, the video was everywhere. The caption read, "Man announces divorce at his own anniversary. Wife's response stuns everyone." Millions watched it. Comments poured in. She handled it like a queen. He thought he'd break her. She built herself instead. The internet can be cruel, but sometimes it has a strange sense of justice. Mark's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. His colleagues saw it, his clients, his boss, even the board of his company. Within a week, they called him in for a conversation. By the end of that meeting, he was unemployed. Judith's world began to crack too. Her friends stopped calling. Her charity group quietly replaced her. The woman who once carried herself like royalty was suddenly invisible. She couldn't even go to the grocery store without hearing whispers. As for Vanessa, she vanished the moment the cameras turned toward her. Reporters had found her social media pages, filled with expensive dinners and selfies captioned "New Beginnings." They found out who paid for those dinners, too. When the backlash came, she deleted everything. Then she deleted him. Mark tried to call her, of course. She never answered. The apartment he'd rented for her was suddenly vacant. The money he'd spent trying to impress her had gone. He sold his car first, then his watch. Eventually, the condo he'd moved into after I left. Even that wasn't enough. There were still debts, loans he'd hidden, favors he couldn't repay. Judith moved in with him after selling her own house. Two fallen royals clinging to what little was left of their empire. Sometimes I'd get updates through mutual acquaintances. "He's not doing well," they'd say. "Looks older, thinner, lost his spark." I never asked for details. I didn't want any. I didn't hate him, not anymore. Hate keeps you tied to what hurt you. I'd already cut that rope. Instead, I focused on my new life, quietly, peacefully. I'd moved to the coastal apartment my aunt had left me. Mornings were filled with sunlight and the sound of waves instead of arguments and lies. I started painting again, something I hadn't done in years. I read books without glancing at the clock. I went entire days without thinking of him. And when I did, it was like remembering someone from another lifetime. One evening, as the sky turned gold over the water, I found myself smiling. Not out of revenge, not out of triumph, just peace. I poured myself a glass of wine, stood on the balcony, and whispered, "He built his own storm. I just walked out of it." And that was enough. 3 months later, I packed my last box, locked the condo door behind me, and drove toward the coast. The sun was soft that morning, painting the highway in gold. I didn't cry. I didn't even look back. That chapter had already closed. My aunt's home by the sea waited quietly, just as she'd left it. White walls, wide windows, and a view that stretched endlessly across the water. For years, I'd visited her here, always saying how peaceful it felt. Now it was mine, my new beginning. The first few days felt strange, waking up to silence, no alarm, no footsteps, no routine built around someone else's needs. But slowly, that silence became a kind of music. I began to fill it with small, gentle things. Morning walks on the sand, tea on the porch, reading until midnight without guilt. Clara came to visit the first weekend after I moved in. She stood on the balcony, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. "You really did it," she said with a smile. "I didn't have a choice," I replied. "It was either rebuild or stay buried." She looked at me, thoughtful. "You're not buried anymore, Elena. You're blooming." That made me laugh. I'm still learning how to. Over time, I did more than just rebuild. I created. With my inheritance, I started a small publishing company run entirely by women. We focused on stories of strength, truth, and survival. Stories that reminded women like me that their voice still mattered, no matter who once tried to silence them. We called it Silver Line Press, because even the darkest clouds can carry light if you wait long enough. The company grew slowly, but it felt right. Every manuscript that landed on my desk was a reminder that resilience isn't just a word, it's a lifeline. Clara often visited after work. We'd sit on the porch, wine glasses in hand, the oceans stretching endlessly before us. One evening, as the sky turned orange and the tide rolled in, she asked quietly, "Do you ever feel revenge, even a little?" I thought about it, about the humiliation, the betrayal, the cold laughter of that night in the ballroom, about the man who thought ending a marriage would end me. Then I shook my head. "No," I said, "I just feel peace." She smiled, the way only someone who truly understands can. "That's what makes you dangerous," she said softly. "You're the calm storm." Some nights I sit alone on the balcony long after sunset. The sea breeze touches my face, carrying the scent of salt and something sweet, maybe freedom. The moonlight dances on the water, and I think about how strange it is that the life I wanted for decades came only after I lost everything I thought I needed. I don't miss Mark, not his voice, not his presence, not even the illusion of our marriage. Sometimes I wonder if he ever thinks about me, if he regrets what he did. But those thoughts come and go like passing waves. They don't stay. He wanted someone younger, someone exciting, someone new. And maybe he found her for a while, but what he really gave me was freedom. Freedom to breathe, to live without pretending, to love myself without apology. As I sit by the sea, watching dawn spill across the horizon, I whisper a quiet thank you, not to him, but to the version of me that finally chose herself. Because in the end, that was the greatest love story of all. Sometimes love doesn't end with heartbreak. It ends with awakening. For years, I thought love meant holding on, fighting, forgiving, staying no matter how heavy it became. But now I know sometimes love is learning when to let go. I lost a husband, yes, but in his absence, I found something far more precious, myself, my peace, my strength, my voice. And if I had to choose again, I'd make the same trade every single time. Because the truth is, pain doesn't just break you, it shapes you. It teaches you who you are when there's nothing left to hold on to but your own courage. If my story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me where you're listening from. Your stories and your voices are what keep me going. Your support helps me tell more stories like mine. Stories about women who rise from silence, rebuild from ashes, and find beauty in their own strength. Remember this: sometimes the most beautiful endings aren't really endings at all. They're beginnings disguised as goodbyes. And the moment you finally walk away from what no longer deserves you, that's when your real story begins.